floating around. I'm glad some of you recovered from your fever. So today I would like to continue the discussion of RSA, largely with motivation that use RSA as a background for us to learn a little bit more about number theory, and also allow us to look into public key encryption scheme with more sort of critical eyes. So those are the two objectives. Right? Look at the component of public key system more critically, and also it is a wonderful case for us to study number theory, because we are going to use many of those concepts continuous on for both the pseudo-random number generation as well as for example, zero knowledge proof. Right. So those are the two purposes. So let me recall RSA as a schema, and I will look into some of its computational and number theoretical components. Right. So RSA, one simple way to visualize is it only takes one parameter called the bit the security level. N represents how many bits you need. Right. So it allows us to use the number of bits in a system to express so-called degree of difficulty to break it. Okay, and so RSA, like most of the encryption scheme, private or symmetric or non-symmetric, essentially has three components. One is the generation. So let me call it GEN, the key generation RSA, and one is encryption RSA, and one is decryption. So essentially, it's these three components, and it's built upon. You can say number theoretically, group theoretically, and I think in the future you probably will see this is more group theoretical than number theoretical. Okay, it just use the group that arise from number theory. Okay, so the generation basically generate a few things. Two prime numbers, PQ. So generation function will generate. So those are primes of n bits. So this is where the input parameter is used. You specify precision, then it produces prime of n bits. I will be more particular on how primes are generated. And so then it will, once it receives this n bits, it will do a few internal computations. So these are just internal computations. So this, you should view that P and Q are random. So there's a great degree of randomness here. Okay, so it will do its internal computation n equal to PQ. Just simply multiply the two numbers. And internally, it will also compute the phi n equal to P minus 1 and Q minus 1. So this is equal to the size of the n star, the multiplicative group defined by n. And then it will choose a random E from the n star. Choose random E. Actually, I should say not from the n star. Let me be more accurate today now. First, the eraser. Oh, here. Is from the phi n star. So you can see the difference between here and here, the phi n star. And so those are all internal computation. And then it's also compute the D equal to E inverse mod phi n star. mod phi n. Okay. So then when it's published, so this is all internal. So you have to think that this is opaquely done. So these are all opaquely done. It's done by the generator, and this is actually done by the individual who want to receive message. Right. So this is the creation of personalized language. Right. When you create a personalized language, you call upon this generator to produce such encoding. Then you publish. So this is the public knowledge now, N and E. So you keep private, essentially N, and you keep private P, Q, and B. So to a larger degree, you also keep private phi n, right? So you can treat it as a phi n is keep the private, right? So this is the private part of the key, and eventually you only need to use D as your private part of the key, and this is a public key. And once you publish this, you define a communication language, and this language has plain text is equal to D n star. Right. So in RSA, the plain text space is generated. It's not a priori determined plain text space. And clearly, if we need to encode text or emails into RSA, usually we ASCII code our text. And then basically, if the number is large enough, we just convert that into a number. If our number is too small, we usually pad it. So that's the two major techniques to convert established plain text space into so-called a mathematical plain text space. Right. So every time RSA is produced, for example, when I generate a key, you generate a key, we may have slightly different so-called mathematical plain text space, right? Even though we can always eventually envision that the common plain text space, namely English or binary, is converted into such domain. Okay, so this defines the plain text space. Okay, and the ciphertext space also is defined. It's also defined to be the n star. So it's defined both the plain text space and the ciphertext space with the generation of the primes. Okay, so this is the component for this. I will expand a little bit more on how this is generated. Okay, so the encryption, as I mentioned last time, is very simple. Whenever you're facing a message from the plain text space, which is equal to the n star. So ENC, N and E, will send M into M to the E mod n. So which means it sends back into the multiplicative group. And the decryption is nearly symmetric to here, which means when you draw C, belong to C, which is equal to the n star, and DEC, and D. We'll send C back to C to the D mod n. Okay? So the mathematical correctness of RSA is just built upon a simple group theoretical identities. That is, mathematically, the correctness is built upon that for all m to the power e, then power d mod n is equal to m to the e times d mod phi n mod n. So this is the equation. And E times D mod Cn, because of the choice, is equal to 1. So that's why A equal back to M mod N. So this is the mathematical correctness of the encryption scheme. It bounces every message after encryption, after decryption back to itself. Right. So this is a group theoretical statement because this group has size phi n, and we knew that automatically it has x, m to the x is equal to m to the x mod phi n. So this is the equation used to build upon this correctness. Okay. So this is the basic schema, and so like every schema, it has its own computational components, right? That its few algorithms have to be used. So we can basically look at what algorithms are used. So this step as algorithm, we use GCD, extended GCD, right? So this step we use GCD, and this step we use multiply, so which we can compute, and clearly the complexity is just in the bits complexity. GCD is also in the bits complexity, so this we did multiply. And this we will discuss, how do we generate PQ, how do we generate PQ, this we need to discuss. And this computation is usually computational wise, I think the simplest way to think about this is either divide and conquer, or it's just a tabulation, simple tabulation. Namely, suppose you can just a priori compute M0, you can compute M1, and you can compute M2, right? So those you can all compute quickly. Then you can compute M4, you can compute M2 to the 3. So you can compute this table, and how many computations are here? That is just logarithmic, right? So this number of computation log in E, right? Log in E. So which means the bit complexity of E. So this is less than n, right? So this number is less than n. Log of E is less than n, because E is a number in Zn star, which means the log of Z is less than 2n, sorry, it's less than 2n. I made one fundamental, I use n here, so here I need to use the capital N. Sorry guys, yeah. Because this I use the bit complexity, I use the book now. And this I use capital N. And this I need to use capital N. This I need to use capital N. This I need to use capital N. And this is this. So this is n bits. And this I need to say capital. Sorry guys, yeah. This is the problem when you read other people's book. Is that you change the notation in your own hand. So this is capital N. The capital N. Capital N. Capital N. Too many capital N now, right? So the only n here is the bits, the n bits. So basically, log of capital N is approximately 2n, right? That's because PQ are 2n bits. Log of
Sorry, but you also changed the n from Zn star, right? Just for clarity, I don't want to.
You mean this?
It, but yeah.
What else did I change? Didn't change?
M equals E n star.
M equal to what?
The M equals E n star, and the crypto
Oh
equals E n
man,
star.
this is just.
That's all right.
That's why. Don't read the books. Only go to class. Sorry guys.
Don't worry. It's all good.
Now it's all changed, right? It's all changed. Okay, it's all changed. So log of n in bits, just like a log of p and log of q, they are roughly n bits, right? So this is basically the setting of the domain, and so n is our typical degree of precision or security level. And today, I think RSA in public is used at least 1K. as a length. So namely, 1,000 bits is the minimum today now. Okay, I think usually it's even bigger than 1K bits now. Okay, the worst period of time is only use 128 bits. Okay, but those time are gone. Those are all eventually defeated now. Okay, so which means that this also means log of E, log of D, they are in the range of n bits. Okay, they are in the range of n. So this is basically the size. So you can treat n is really the size of the message length. Okay, you may ask if I have message longer than n, then you have to block it. Right? If your message is larger than the n star, you have to block it. You have to take each block and encrypt it on their own. Okay. So one simple way to do exponentiation is you can just build this table, right? Because from here to here, just one multiply. From here to here, just another multiply, right? Those are all computed on the mod capital N. So which means that you can see why mod is nice thing is that your complexity never become bigger. You're always running in the log n, in the n bits, right? So basically when you go from here, just one multiply mod n. So actually technically one multiply, one divide, right? So this is where computation, to a certain degree, is not totally cheap. It has some complexity there. So this is another multiply, this is another multiply. So you only need to do so many times. Okay? So then once you have you need to compute m to the e, intuitively you can just write e as a binary number, right? So you can write m, this is e just as a binary number. So e1, so let's say e0, e1, e2, n. So this is just like a binary number. And in each of the binary number, it's just 2 to that location, whether you have that bit or not. So that's why you can just pick from this table, just multiply them together, right? So that's why m to the e can be computed in how many multiply you need to do log, n multiply, little n multiply, and here basically for each of those you already pre-computed, and the most computation is n of the squares, right? So here you did n multiplies because you just keep on squaring the number, and here actually you did n multiplies. Right, you did n multiplies. So essentially you did 2n multiplies. You do 2n multiplies. So you did 2n multiplies and of n bits, 2n bits. Right, so this is basically the complexity. 2n multiplies of 2n bits. 2n multiplies of 2n bits. And what is usually the complexity of multiply? Actually, it will be my lecture for next week for my 670 class. So there's a famous algorithm called FFT, called fast Fourier transform, and that allows you to multiply roughly in order of n times log n time. So multiplication can be done in n times log n times because of using fast Fourier transform, which is one of the very beautiful algorithm in the land, invented in the 50s. So this almost has nothing to do with computer science. In the 50s, they have this beautiful algorithm. And this algorithm essentially can multiply numbers up to n bits in basically like sorting time. And this basically give you, if you look, it give you basically n squared time algorithm. So this basically is the cost of encoding. It's n squared times log n. So that's why it's not totally cheap. It's not totally free, right? As your bit length become bigger. It's quadratic in bit length. Right? That's why you can see that it actually has certain limitation on the bit length in the speed. Okay? So this is how fast you can encrypt. It's also similarly how fast you can decrypt. Right? So you can encryption, decryption just come from this what I call exponentiation algorithm. You can either write recursively as divide and conquer, or you can just write enumeratively, like I compute all the power of 2 and I choose my bit and then multiply them. Okay, that is so here basically is equal to the product of m to the 2 to the k, and here I times ek. Okay. So this is for k equal to 0 to whatever the length. So this is how this multiplies now. And here you can just go to the table. Okay. You can just go to the table. Then you can also write recursively, and in fact, in practice, it's usually done in the divide and conquer way, not in this way. I write this way, just say, it's so simple to see it. It's a flat way to say it. Right? So this means encryption is efficient, quadratic time, roughly speaking. Right? Encryption quadratic time, decryption quadratic time, and the key generation actually take a little bit longer time. So this is one thing I would like to discuss. But I would like to discuss in the context, I want to introduce some number theory concept that's good for our future rather than just for this class. Right, so I would like to tie these two things together. So one question is, how do we generate the random numbers? Random. And this was not known before 70s. Right? So you can see why all those developments are tied around a similar time. Because before that, if you have this scheme, you can't generate it. Because it's very hard to pick up primes. Right? So in 70s, they reduced this problem, generation problem, to Tesla prime. And then they use this reduction built upon one thing, that is primes are dense enough. So this is the only reason they can reduce the types of primes, is that primes are dense enough. As a result, you can just use the following algorithm to generate the primes. That is, when you have n bits, you just generate, so this I will call gen modulo. So that's the name of the book, 1n. So you can just do the following, random choose p from n bits numbers. Right, so this you can do, you just flip n bits randomly and test if p is a prime. Okay? If yes, output p. Otherwise, you just go back to the loop. You randomly produce n-bit string, test whether it's prime. Half of the time it's not prime, right? Because it's an even number. So clearly it's not half time you can be successful. This is slightly lower than this. And the chance of successful is 1 over n. That is from fundamental theory in numbers of density of primes. Because we knew the density of prime of n-bit length occurred with density roughly 1 over n. So which means that in expectation you only need to run n times of this, right? In n time you will see a random prime. If you run n time you will see a random prime, right? So this basically you can think as the following. we go to the ocean, we want to catch fish. How do you catch a fish? You have a huge net and you scoop into the water and you see whether there's a fish in it. Right? You go to a random spot of ocean, you just scoop it up to see whether there's a fish in it. And if net is empty, what do you do? What can you do? You screw up again, right? And if the probability to catch a fish is 1 over n, then in expectation, you need to scoop about n times, right? So in fact, the famous Chernoff bound in probability theory says that if you just multiply by a logarithmic more times, then with high probability you will catch a fish, right? So basically, if in any expectation you catch one fish, then if you try n times log n time, then with probability at least 1 over n, you will catch a fish. So that's how quickly this thing concentrates. So that's why being able to catch one fish is almost as cheap as to catch one fish with 100% probability. Okay, so those two quantities only off by log n. Okay, so this basically the density of prime allow us to have this random fishing algorithm, right? You just go there, flip your coins. That's just like you go to the ocean, you did one scoop, and then you ask, is this number is prime? If it is, you keep it. Otherwise, you try again. Right? So there's nothing new, nothing more than to this thing. So which means in general you need to do order of n times log n times. Okay, you need to try n times log n times because the primarity density is that your density is 1 over n. 1 over n chance you see a fish, which means intuitively n times you get one fish. But if you try n times log n times, with exceptional high probability, you always get a fish. That's this statement. Okay? So this comes from the traditional so-called Chernoff bound of independent trials, because independent trial has a lot of powers. When you try, the field probability shrink exponentially. Okay. So this is related with, for example, coins, right? Coin has two sides, head and tail. When you flip a coin, let's say head is fish, tail is not fish, which means 50% time you will get a fish, right? So I will ask you, what is the probability when I flip a coin you see a head? You say half, right? Because that's the only thing you know. So I said, how many try you will in expectation see a head? 2, right? Because I flip once, I flip twice. In expectation, I see a fish 50% chance in the first try, 50% chance in second try, which means I try twice. In expectation, I saw one head, right? But you can see that sometimes we can be so totally unlucky, right? The moment we walk into Las Vegas, we become unlucky. We just feel like we keep on getting tails, right? That's because, they don't play fair coins. So, but with fair coins, if you flip, let's say K coins, I ask you, what is the probability you didn't see a head? That's 1 over 2 to the K. Agree? Because you have to fail every time, and those are independent probabilities, so 1 over 2 to the K. You don't see a fish, right? So that's why it's exponentially decay in the chance that you totally failed, right? If you throw log n coins, which means 2 to the log n is 1 over n, right? And that means 1 over n chance you may not see a head. The rest of the time you see a head. And if you didn't see a head, you have to say someone cheated, because this is just exceptionally high probability, low probability, right? Where you just that unlucky, and some of us can be, right? So this log n comes from the same thing. So that's why once you see 1 with log n more times, with probability at least 1 minus 1 over n, you will see a head, right? In this case, you will see a prime, right? So that's why you need to do so many times of this protocol. And so this basically pin everything into one task. How do we test whether a number is prime or not, right? So I mentioned to you that cryptography is walk on the paradox, on the boundary of paradox, right? So if you look at here, what is security of RSAs depend upon? That is, when I give you n, you couldn't factor it. Right? I give you n. If you find PQ, what's the point of keeping them private? Right? So it assumes that given n and e, you can't get PQ. Once you get PQ, the game is over. Right? Clearly, because I can compute my d, I can decrypt every time. Right? So the security intuitively depend upon factoring. It's hard. Right, so this intuitively has to be dependent upon that, right? Because once I can factor, this whole scheme is worthless, right? Because I am getting the key, and nobody can keep it a secret, right? Secrecy. But on the other hand, on the flip side, the efficiency of RSA depends upon testing prime. It's easy. And it's easier to tell a number is prime or not. Right? So this can only mean, such a world exists, can only mean that you're able to tell whether a number is prime or not without being able to factor. Right? Because if testing prime depends on factoring, then there's no such a scheme. You can see the fine boundary, right? Otherwise you can't produce those primes. Right? So which means mathematically, one must attempt to try to determine whether a number is prime or not without actually first decide who are the factors. Because clearly that's one sure way to decide whether you're prime or not, is you just run out all the factors, and you say, hey, you have factor, you're not prime. Right? So clearly, this is what I call on the boundary between paradox. RSA walk just tightly there. Right? RSA walk with the fact, a lucky fact in 70s, that testing prime is easy. But working on the assumption that nobody yet know how to factor. Right? So this is the very thin assumption is used within RSA. Right? Factoring is hard, testing prime is easy. So which means mathematically, if you ask people in 60s, is testing prime is easier than factoring, most people will say these two probably are the same problem. Okay? Most people will say these two probably are the same problem. The only reason why 70s people have confidence is there's a very simple paper by Pratt from Stanford. He's a number theoretical computer scientist. Von Pratt is his name. And so Von Pratt in early 70s, proved the following result. That testing primes, because suddenly NP and P suddenly showed up, right? Because NP and P was first mentioned in '69 by Stephen Cook from Berkeley, and then become popularized around '72 by Descartes. Now, along the way, there's a Russian mathematician whose name we will show later on, also deeply in crypto domain. So Stephen Cook in around '69 introduced NP, and I think around a similar time as Levin. So he was a student of Kolmogorov, who is heavy, milestone figures in mathematics. And Levin wrote also an article in Russia about NP formulation. He called it universality of computing. Okay, and then '72, Karp of Berkeley really made it into popular concept because he suddenly pointed out essentially everything we see in our life is NP complete. Right, from partitioning graph, partitioning number, coloring graph, finding independent set, TSP, traveling salesperson problem, to VLSI layout. He just began to throw in almost everything which people scheduling, almost everything we consider to be easy computational tasks. into this NP completeness, right? So this is a domain where people began to talk about NP and P. And so when Cook defined NP and P, Cook actually didn't separate the following concept. There's something called co-NP. Okay? So let me just use a layman's way to say what is a NP and what is a co-NP. Okay? So NP is to determine whether a mathematical statement is true. How do you determine that? You give a proof. Right? Once someone gets a proof, like for Moore's law's theorem, as conjecture, if you prove it, then other mathematicians will quickly verify to say this is a great proof. Right? The hardness is come up with that proof. Right? So which means the moment someone throws a proof, then we all throw our hand up to say this is true. Right? Because that's why no one now debate for Moore's law's theorem is not true anymore, right? Because there's a proof. Okay? So this is NP. So what is co-NP? Co-NP essentially is to justify a mathematical statement is false. How do you justify a mathematical statement is false? It means any attempt to prove is false. Which means there's no proof. Right? So you can see the asymmetry, right? Things that has a proof, we can verify. Right? Because once someone gives you the proof, you can verify. But then you say something doesn't have a proof. That is a much different statement, because how do you justify something that doesn't have a proof? Right? So Karp enunciated this thing, and basically the map of this problem is 3 sets. You know, that's the one we learned in the NP completeness class. And the thing of this is a negation of 3 sets. That is a satisfiable language that has no solutions, right? So those are the two maps. Just like, you know, if I give you a puzzle, I said, is this puzzle solvable? If you make the puzzle, it's solvable, right? Because we can just check. But what if someone play a trick, give you a puzzle on the plane, it's actually unsolvable? So you bust your brain out, try to solve it, and in the end, all you declare I didn't solve it. Right? But if you convince people it's unsolvable, you have to figure out this is a different level of argument, right? How do you argue it's unsolvable? You can't just simply say, I can't solve it. Right? Because then people couldn't verify that statement. What do you mean I can't solve it? Right? So you can say solvable and unsolvable are asymmetric. Right? But in old days when Cook defined his, they all built upon this notion called reduction. Right? So called polynomial time. Right? Polynomial time reduction of problem, which is we test on NP completeness, right? That is you give me an instance of first problem, for example, testing whether the graph is recolorable. Then suppose you want to reduce that to a scheduling problem, right? It means there's a polynomial transformation to define a scheduling instance of polynomial size, such that if the scheduling problem has solution, then the original problem has solution. If the scheduling problem has no solution, the original problem has no solution, right? So that's why if someone solves the scheduling problem, then you also solve the coloring problem, right? So this is essentially the level of reduction. So Cook, at that time when he reduced, he didn't reduce this if and only if. He basically allowed you to do the negation too. He said you can also reduce the coloring to what's the second problem I said? I just blanked out. I said coloring and what's the second problem I said? Scheduling. Yeah, gosh, I just blanked. I'm searching for that problem. So Cook said you can define this way. So he called Turing reduction. That is you can have a coloring problem. Then you build a scheduling problem. Then he said, suppose the following is true. if the coloring problem is true, then the scheduling problem is unsolvable. It's not true. Can't schedule it. If the coloring problem is not true, then scheduling problem is solvable. Then he said, this is a polynomial time reduction too, right? Because if you solve the scheduling problem, you just flip it. Right? Because the take negation, he said computationally had no cost. So that's why Cook defined this very loosely. He just said computationally, if you can use the answer to the other problem, I can answer this way. So CARP, one of the major contributions, among many other things, is to refine this reduction to say you can only have positive instance go to positive instance. It doesn't allow you to use this negation. And in that case, then suddenly NP and co-NP are not reducible to each other. Because otherwise they are reducible to each other. Because you just ask the other question. Right? You said, is this mathematical statement is true? You just ask another clever mathematician, is this false? If he said, it's false, then you say, okay, it's not true. Right? Right? So that's clearly is a reduction, but that reduction doesn't carry a weightiness. But if positive to positive, I said, if this statement true, I have to ask you, if this statement true, then I can carry your proof backward. Right? So that's why Kopp enunciated this, and one of the major questions still open today, just like NP and P question, is whether NP is equal to co-NP. Okay? To determine whether a mathematical statement is true, or determine a mathematical statement is false, are they equal or not? And it's widely believed they are not. Okay? It's also widely believed it's not. Okay? So this is the level of complexity that arose in the 70s, and also provided the fundamental language for cryptography. Right? So that's why people began to draw these figures. Right? You have P, and here you have NP. Right? The question is whether is P properly NP. Right? That's one thing. Or P is the entire NP. Right? And correspondingly, there's also something called the co-NP. So that's the other one. So people don't know whether co-NP is equal to P. But P belongs to P, both cases. Once you can answer P, you can both answer positive negation because it's the same question. Because these concepts are all done in polynomial time reduction, and today we say in the polynomial time CARP reduction. So that's where the name CARP showed up in this reduction, because CARP reduction requires you to go positive instance to positive instance. You can't flip the thing. Okay? Why do I discuss this? In part because I do have to map out what eventually complexity assumption for things like RSA. Do we have strong assumption like this, or we actually use weaker assumption like this? Right? The answer is actually the assumption we use is weaker than this. We can't just simply say yet, if NP is not equal to P, you have encryption scheme. So that is still unknown, and largely believe it's not true. I need at least some other twist of conditions. But one thing important is that during around similar time, I think that's how you write Pratt, P-R-A-T-T, Pratt, Von Pratt. So he was a professor at Stanford. I think he's also one of the early founders of this. He made a lot of money later on in life. Good to be a mathematician, actually make money. I think he's one of the early founders of this company. Some, when they build they are the people who build the workstations. Right. Before that is all like small monitors. So they are the one building workstations in the, I think, late 80s and early 90s. This company clearly made a lot of money. Had I put all my RA stipend into Sun, I would be doing good too at those days. But I didn't spend all my money on rent and other things. So he actually proved the following: testing if a number is prime or not belong to NP in the second critical NP. So that's the first result on testing prime. He proved testing prime is very special. It's in both NP and co-NP. So this is actually the first time people began to have some guess that this thing could be in polynomial time. Because this particular problem, to determine whether it's prime or not prime, they all have short proofs, right? And so which means when you don't have factors, it also have short proof. And it's really this result, the one plus result, I think drive the next generation of young kids, back then in 70 young kids, and including Len Edelman of our department. He's still young, but he was younger. And my advisor Gary Miller, among few people, they somehow really believe that probably there's a polynomial time element for testing prime. Okay, so that's the historical background. So we will continue to navigate through this dual language, right? Something is hard, something is easy. We have to continue to navigate through this thing, right? Because something easy, we use them to generate the keys, we use them for encryption, and something hard is only ways we can fence off attack, right? So that's why public key encryption theory or modern cryptography is built upon the fundamental simultaneous understanding of algorithmic development and complexity development, right? If whenever it's crossed, then such a schema is no longer exist. It's really dependent upon a believable separation between what is doable and what is not doable. Okay? And this is partially why many other disciplines in mathematics, statistics, they essentially have no chance to discover scheme in public key crypto. In part because if you don't study computational language, you can't somehow have this narrow separation of the two instances. Okay? So any question up to here? So I would like to use this thing to at least introduce one more concept, a preliminary of number theory, and that will be the one we'll continue to use in the next few lectures. Testing prime. So this simple question, right? It's a number prime. It's pure prime. So the complement question, the co-NP question is P. The pure composite. Composite means it's made by multiply of prime vectors. Okay. So these are the two basic questions. So before we reach here, because we have to separate them from factoring, so that's why I would like to introduce some other mathematical concept that actually play a critical role in eventually a polynomial test for such questions, right? So let's come back to the basic group theory associated with numbers, right? So we define Zn star. So for now, let's consider even simpler question. Let's call Zp star. Suppose P is a prime, right? So then Zp star is literally just 1, 2, P minus 1, right? Because this just by definition we know, right? When P is a prime, means nothing divided. So which means that everyone has GCD 1. That's why everyone has a multiplicative inverse from either Bayes' theorem or from the extended GCD. And so this is a Zp star. And Zp star has another beautiful property. That is Zp star is acyclic. that there exists a number, so let's call G, star, such that VP star equal to G0, G1, G minus 2. Because we knew GP minus 1, so this from group theory we know, right? This from the Lagrange theorem. Right. So GP, because this group has only p minus 1 elements, every element will hit 1. But this elements, if you just power it up, it gives rise to the entire group. So this type of group called cyclic group. Okay, this type of group, cyclic group. So I'm not going to overly state yet, because later on we can come back to talk about including crypto systems that are defined on such group. For now, I will postpone that discussion. I just want to point out one thing. Just one thing. If this thing can be written this way, there's one immediate mathematical fact, which is beautiful because this we'll use continuously. Right? So this mathematical fact is following. If you look at the exponent of this array, it just bounces out each even number, odd number, even number, odd number, even number, odd number, right? Because this is just enumeration of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 to p minus 2. Agree? So this is just an enumeration of this. And one thing nice is that if you look at the G2, G3, G4, right? If you look at this number, and if you look at this number, if you look at this number, right, this is equal to 1. Right? They are all perfect squares. They are perfect squares. Right. So this is the last time I called it quadratic. I didn't write down, right? Gosh, I'm losing my quadratic spelling. Quadratic, right? Residue. So they all call it quadratic residues. So namely, they are perfect squares. Okay? Did I spell correct? QUAD, not T. RATS. Quadratic residues. Okay. So just trivially, right? Because even power has to be a perfect square. In every mathematical domain, right? Even power is perfect square. Right? Because if you write that G2k, you're equal to GK to the 2. Right? So you are a perfect square. Right? So this means that if you look at ZP star, exactly 50% of them are perfect squares. Agree? The density of perfect square here is 50%. This is a quick statement, right? A quick statement. So if P is a prime, then exactly half are perfect squares. And also exactly half are non-perfect squares. Right? So this is one thing I alluded. The only place you have exactly half perfect squares and exactly half a non-perfect square are the real numbers, right? Exactly all the positive are perfect squares and negative are perfect. But here it's much more interlaced. It's almost like we put the plus minus, we mixture them together. Okay? So this also was innocent fact people knew for 100 years. And it's never a big deal. Actually, it was not that big deal. But when you enter the computer science age, we are looking for encoding of 0, 1s. We're looking for encoding of 0, 1s. And this is a perfect encoding for 0, 1. Right? You can say a number is perfect square is 0. A number is not perfect square is 1. And in this domain, if you randomly take elements, you flip coins. How do I flip coins? I choose a random power, I power it. Or you choose a random number. I don't even need power it. Right? Because we knew these two representations are the same. It's just a repermutation of the domain. Right? So if we mathematically encode 0, 1s, perfect square mod p are 0, non-perfect square mod p are 1. I can flip coins. All I need to do is choose a random number and mod p. Even though you may not be able to test the thing yet, but I knew I choose uniformly. I flip a coin. Right? So this is how coin flip can be done in number theory. Okay? Right. So that's why this is a beautiful structure. This gave a bunch of coins. ZP star, just a bunch of coins. Right? Each of those are randomly flipped. If you take a random one, head, tail, just a bunch of coins. Okay? Some are head heavy and some are tail heavy. Okay? So that's why choose a random one. You can see why this thing later on be used in random number generation, because it has these natural encodings. You don't have to use 0, 1 to encode 0, 1. You can use some other mathematical property to encode 0, 1. And this is one of the, in my mind, most beautiful example. Right? You can use the evenness of exponent to encode 0, 1. Right? You can use even number and odd number encode 0, 1. This we knew a long time ago. And here provide another group theoretical realization of that. Okay? So because of this, this problem was heavily recycled within pseudo-random number generation all the way to encryption, all the way to zero knowledge proof, because the simplicity here. Okay, right. So this is what I call my mathematical coins now, right? My mathematical coin is choose a prime number and flip it. So later on, I will change a little bit of this coin, and it's in some sense RSA or some of its extension is a flip in slightly modified domain than this. But this is perfect so far, right? Okay.
In what way is it clear that G itself is not a perfect square?
Huh?
So is there?
Hmm?
So I guess the
G cannot be perfect.
I guess
Yeah.
G cannot be perfect.
Yeah, because otherwise G will not be able to produce all, just by definition. Because when you win halfway of that, if G is perfect square, you win halfway of that.
I see.
Right, just by definition, it has to be this way. Okay. So, if this doesn't make you love basic number theory, it's hard for me to continue to teach. But this is really a beautiful fact. So this is why you can see each generation come in, look at the mathematical facts differently, right? The early generation, they look at them as a group, and they call cyclic group, just talk for a long time. And then computer science came in, which in some sense had the least math training. Then he said, that's perfect coins, right? Because they are looking for representation of the basic in their domains, right? So that's why they are one of the first group to realize these are encoding of binary numbers. Okay. So how do we test the prime? And so the first question is, who are the, if I give you a number, if I give you a G, write it this way, you clearly know who is a perfect square, because you just look at their representation. But usually, our domain is given like this. Right? So for example, what is the Z7 star? It's basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right? So who are perfect squares here? Let's just try. This is a perfect square, right? What about 2? How do you know 2 is not perfect square? Is 2 perfect square? Mod 7? So let's just figure out who is. Then because we knew half of them are, right? If we can just do elimination, we can get half of them, we're done, right? So is a 4 perfect square? Yeah, 4 is that's one thing I know. Who else is perfect square? We just need to figure out another one. Who else is perfect square?
9 mod 7 is 2.
Huh?
9 mod 7 is 2.
So 9, so 3 square mod 7. It's 9 mod 7 is equal to 2. Actually, this is perfect square. You were wrong, let me just see, you can see it's very easy to, it's hard to immediately tell just by the look. Right? So those are your perfect squares. And I can prove to you, just based on this, none of those are perfect squares. Okay, you can't make 3 perfect squares. You can't make this. What is 6? 6 is actually -1, right? 6 is -1. Okay? So those are your perfect square. So clearly if I write down the net Q much bigger, then you will need effort to decide who is perfect square. Right? Remarkably, this decision, who is perfect square, can be decided in polynomial time. This was also known for a few hundred years. Okay? It's a simple way to decide who is perfect square. That is following. This comes from Euler. So Euler figured out how to decide who is perfect square mod primes. Okay. What is his definition? It's actually, after this, if I write out, it's trivial. He said you just write your number x to the power q minus 1, I said p minus 1, right? P minus 1 divided by 2. You're asking for this number. Okay? So here is the logic. If x is a perfect square, right? So then x to the power p minus 1 over 2. Is p minus 1 over 2 an integer? Because here we don't use p as prime number. We use p is always an odd number. Right? So p minus 1 minus 2 actually is an integer. So it's a very convenient fact, right? Because after 2, who cares about 2? There basically you know already. So after 2, as long as p is odd. As long as p is odd prime, then this is an integer, right? And this is equal to y squared p minus 1 divided by 2. So this will be equal to y p minus 1, and this will be equal to 1. Right? So Euler said, if you happen to be perfect square, you just power up to p minus 1 over 2, you should hit 1. Right? So in his logic, see that the other bunch of guys can only hit -1. Because this is the group, which means that 1 has 2 roots. Because in this kind of field, everybody can, this solvability is that 1 actually has 2 square roots. Who are the 2 square roots of 1? 1 and -1. Right? Then he said if x is equal to y squared, it's not equal to y squared for all y, then this has to be implied xp minus 1 over 2 is equal to -1. Okay? So the proof actually trivial comes from this cyclic representation. Because we learned that the G1 is not a perfect square, because otherwise it will not produce this thing. So which means when G1 raising power to this, it has to give you -1, because it has to be equal to negative. Otherwise it will produce a smaller group. So this means everybody else has a G1 in it, and the rest part are perfect square. That thing went down with a 1, and that's why you left with -1. Right? So this is basically Euler's proof. Right? Euler's proof, first proof that G1 when you're raising this power has to be -1, and then he said everyone has all the components with G must raise -1. So this is Euler test. Right? And we know that this can be computed in polynomial time now, right? Because I just talked about computing exponentiation, just like RSA, right? So that's why the moment that we knew how to compute exponentiation, all the tasks can be done in polynomial time, right? So there is a trivial test called Euler test that will allow you to test one equal. So let's just try out, right? So what is 7 minus 1 over 2? 3, right? So let's raise 1 over the power to 3. What is 5 to the 3?
125.
Is equal to 125 mod 7. Who can do mod 7 fast? Huh? We have one guess, it has to be 6. If you really do that, it's 6 actually. It is 6. It is 6. Okay. So 5 third equal to 6 third equal to 6 3 third. They all equal to 6. Okay? And the other third, in 1 to the power 3 is 1, 2 to the power 3 is 8, mod 7 is 1, and 4 to the power 3 is 64, mod 7, because 63 is multiple, is 1. Right? So clear, this is clean, right? So Euler basically said that if I happen to have a prime, that the decision who is my coin 0 or 1 is polynomial time decidable, right? So this is Euler's saying. So far, basically, you will look at this, you said clearly there's not much crypto other than encoding 0, 1. Actually, those coins are not opaque. You can tell those coins whether it's head and tail, right? So later on, we are going to create number-theoretic domains that it's hard to tell whether a coin is head and tail. And this essentially solves all the encryption scheme and pseudo-random number generation. Okay? So that's one of the early examples to realize perfect, nearly computational perfect scheme exists from this domain. Okay? But for now, it's a for accidents, right? So at least we see a domain we can encode 0, 1. Why they are useful, let's leave to the future setting, right? Okay. So this is Euler's algorithm. Okay, this is Euler's. So let me remove my example and leave only the good part to the board. Yeah. Okay. So any question up to here? So this will be the main number theory I will do, but I will introduce another concept. I will not go through the because it's to a degree, lesser degree important to our future. I will only state the property without overly spending time here. If you're interested in that, there's plenty of reading. Otherwise, I will quickly try to tie this to this problem. It's PR prime. Okay. I didn't lay out my board properly. Let me leave half board out. Let me leave half board out. I should have thought a little bit more today. So this is a scheduling problem, simply complete. So let's come back to this question. Is a number compounded prime? So one of the first testing prime came out with this beautiful outlay, a beautiful statement that is following. If you look at the Euler's, so Euler basically gave a predicate to decide whether a number is a perfect square or not, mod p, if p is prime, right? So historically, let me get the other name correctly. So historically, the contemporary layout of this test is the following. So Legendre is the first one to conceptualize the perfect square things, mod prime. So he basically said, let me introduce a symbol, which is just, in modern days, we call the characteristic function. He said, let me write down x. Unfortunately, historically, I think it's a horrible symbol. That's why making number series a little bit hard to swallow for this junction. The confusing of the Legendre symbol is that they use our traditional division as a symbol. But usually we put a little bracket. So Legendre symbol is right as this. He said, this is my symbol, called Legendre symbol. I actually really hate this one because every time I teach, people ask me, why do you divide? So this is not divide, it's just a symbol. Sometimes I just using LPQ, XP. So this, if I'm choose to the literature, this is how they used to print. They said it's equal to 1 if x is a perfect square. Okay, so it's at a 0 if x equals to 0, and negative 1 if x is not a perfect square. So that's basically like general symbol. It essentially has, it's just today we call characteristic, the characteristic of the x, right? So he said, if you look at number in ZP, essentially it has 3 parts. It has 0 unions ZP star, and within the ZP star, you either have 1 negative 1, right? So there's only 3 types. So he defined to be the type. He called, but this is nice. It's a binary encoding of. So you can see at that time Boolean algebra was not defined, right? So that's why it kind of nice historically. People actually convert that into a Boolean representation. But instead of using 1 and 0, they actually use 1 and negative 1. So this is really the Boolean part. This 0 just happens to be there, right? Because this, if you take out 0, all other numbers are either positive numbers or negative numbers, depending upon whether you call perfect square or not perfect square. Right? So this Legendre symbol, and Euler basically gave a formula to this, right? He said this actually is equal to x to the p minus 1 over 2 log p. Right? This Euler said, right? Everything we did here just proved this, right? Euler said this is true. And this totally looks like harmless so far. And a few years later, Jacobi, which is the same as person Jacobian, which we often use, clearly a remarkable mathematician. And so he actually, the best way to introduce symbol for yourself, and eventually he extended this symbol. He said you don't need p to be prime. He said that he wanted to introduce a symbol x over any n. He said, what this symbol means? He said, suppose n is equal to the product of pi to the k, and I equal to 1 to t. You know, suppose n can be written as prime factors. He said, how about I just call this a symbol x over pi to the k. So if n can be written as a prime factor power, he said, let me define a symbol. So that's why it's better to call this LXP, and this I will call JXN, right? So for now, you can write this way. Later on, we can separate this. So basically, JXN is equal to pi equal to 1 to t, and LXP pi to the ki, ki. Right. So this if a number can be break down into prime factors, which they knew, every number can be written the product of the powers of prime. Then he said, let's call my symbol to be the product of your symbol with respect to the power. Right? And he said clearly, when a number is prime, my symbol is equal to your symbol. Right? When this number is prime, the Jacobian symbol and Legendre symbol is the same, right? Because it just that number is in power 1. Okay? And it's absolutely innocent, this thing, right? You just look, it's almost a meaningless definition. And one thing suddenly become meaningful to modern days is also a fact they knew for 100 years, is that Jacobi gave a extended Euclidean algorithm-like things to compute his symbol. He said, even though I don't know the factors of my numbers, I can compute this, essentially in polynomial time. And the basic idea is Euclidean algorithm. Okay? So he had a bunch of rules, just like Euclidean rules. And he miraculously said that rule can compute his symbol. Right. So I will leave that rules. Later on, I will hand you a sheet. Okay, I will send you out a picture of the rule. I'm not going to overly do it because we'll never see that rule again. So I'm not going to comment to this time to do it. Right. So this is a Jacobi symbol. Right. Jacobi symbol is just a loose way to write these characters. Okay. And it just happened to be, this can be computed in polynomial time. So Jacobi symbol can be computed in polynomial time. It was just an accidental historical fact buried in his proof. Okay. And remarkably, this gave rise to the first testing of prime algorithm. Okay. So for our purpose, I will use Jacobi symbol right this way, otherwise it will be more confusing. When you read the books, the notes I gave to you, it all have this. Do not think they are divide. If you think about divide, very quickly, I can't help you anymore on reading this. It's one of the most confusing part if you think it's a divide. In fact, as a student, the first time I went back to read, I totally think it's a divide, and I just couldn't derive them anymore. Right? They are not divide. Right. So they went through also using power of 2, they did the inductive proof of this thing, okay, to compute this in polynomial time. So the first testing of prime is given by Solovay-Strassen. So how many of you heard about Strassen in your algorithm class? Who heard about Strassen? What did Strassen do?
Matrix.
Matrix multiply. He's the first one to beat n-cube matrix multiply. You know how he beat the n-cube matrix multiply? I think he's a visiting scholar to Berkeley, and then he began to take Karp's class on algorithm. So those are good old days of algorithm class, 270, I guess. And on the board, one day he came too late. There's he received a homework. He actually looked at the Karp's homework. He usually didn't do everything. In the homework, basically they have the following, they defined the RAM model. You can, in unit time you can fetch a number, in unit time you can multiply, in unit time you can add. So then there's a homework. Back then, gosh, it's good to be student. He said, proof, in n-cube time, you can multiply 2 matrix. So all you need to do is just write down definition and you count n-cube time. That's your homework. We don't do that anymore, right? You can see it's a so Strassen has a tremendous respect of Karp, right? And he took the homework, and Karp is great educator, right? Great educators means that at this right level, you have to assign right homework. Then people build up, they become imaginary, right? But in this particular case, Karp was totally and not already think about these matrix things. It's just as an example, people can count the operation. I just define what's a RAM model. What's the best way to count how many times you fetch and multiply? And Strassen went home, continued to think Karp means something else. So this is actually first time he eventually assembled this 9x9 matrix, submatrix multiply, and he got it down to I think into the he got the multiplication to into the 2.81, right? So that's the first such algorithm. It's fairly simply combined, just divide and conquer, and right. That's why we teach today. And so he went to Karp. He said, "If this means what to solve your homework, it actually takes some effort. Good question, good problem." Then Karp said, "No, I know we can do beta and cube. I thought cube is lower bound. I actually, in my complexity class, I assign proof multiply matrix need n cube time." Right. So clearly at that time, Karp actually believed it's n cube time. Oh, this is a 1,000 years old question. How do you beat it, right? So this actually, I think together with FFT, are really a remarkable things of computing time, right? Because if you look at multiply numbers, we also did it for 1,000 years. Thousands of years we multiply numbers, right? And only in 50s, in modern days, suddenly people believe you can multiply numbers faster than n squared time. Right? And one of such belief drive it all the way down to n times log n. Right? So it's still a big open question whether multiply two matrix is order of n squared time. Okay, this is still big open question. Right? So current standoff 2.37 Okay, this is a beautiful open question. One of the world leaders is sitting in Caltech, and they have many group theoretical beliefs that this actually might be achievable to do in square time. So that will be a beautiful breakthrough if it can be done. Okay, I think the change is almost like FFT. It's really looking to a lot of. So Solowitz-Strassen has one of the best algorithms in the history. You can also say they did nothing, but it's beautiful. Okay, so Solowitz-Strassen, how do we test if P is a prime? So Solowitz-Strassen said, let's do randomization, the following random algorithm. First step, randomly select x from the P star. So that's me using n now, right? So rather than P, you think as a prime. Let's just in general n now, right? So let's just choose a random number. He said, second, you ask Euler's formula, so which means you compute x n minus 1 over 2. Here, n is believed to be odd, right? Because otherwise we already know. And then you're asking what is equal to the Jacobi symbol. Because he said that Jacobi said that can be computed in polynomial time, why don't we compute it twice? Once using Euler's, or namely Legendre symbol, once I use the Jacobi symbol, right? So if yes, that is a prime. If no, it's not prime.
Professor?
I'm confused in something, but for Jacobian, you define in terms of the factors, and you said you were testing without factoring, right?
Yeah, but Jacobi proved that you can compute this in polynomial time. I will send you the rule.
Without finding the p.
Yeah. Jacobi find a Euclidean-like algorithm to compute his symbol in polynomial. Mathematical back then, there's no polynomial time. He said there's another way to compute this. Okay? I will send this page. I should have sent it earlier, but I will take an iPhone shot and send to you that page, all of you. Okay? So I'm using this fact now. Otherwise, you make a good point. Otherwise, what's your point, right? The main point is Jacobi happened to stumble upon a particular function that actually can be computed in polynomial time. And this function happened to be true, equal to the Legendre symbol or Euler's formula when the modulo is a prime. Right? So then basically he said, so Solovitz-Strassen come in, write a 3-line code, and receive multiple prize for this 3-line code. Okay, this 3-line code receive multiple prize, including a prize name called Theory and Practice. Right. So it said to take a random number, you raise it in the power to n minus 1 over 2 mod n. So if this number come back, it's not plus minus 1, you immediately declare it's not prime. Agree? Because it can't be a prime, because it has to come back from plus minus 1, right? So they don't care. They compute this number, then they compute the Jacobi symbol based upon Jacobi's other polynomial time algorithm. Okay? And this number clearly has to be 0, 1, or negative 1. Unless you ignore 0, it's just plus minus 1. Right? So Jacobi symbol is a Boolean, right? Plus minus 1. This could be anything. Right? So what they said is that if they equal, likely is a prime. So instead of say prime, let me use where's my board? Eraser?
On the floor.
Huh? Oh. I have back issues. I can only pick up like this. Don't be injured. Don't get old. My son. So yeah, I can't bend. I can't squat. That's basically the two things I can't do. So let me put this likely. This is even better language to output, right? And if it's no, it will say not prime. So this algorithm is polynomial, right? Clean, right? So then they said actually you can run this a few more round. But let's ignore that. Let's just look at the one round. So this is just the famous Solovitz-Strassen algorithm. They said there are two ways to compute the same mathematical quantity if the number is prime. Otherwise it may be different. Let's make a test out of it. Okay? So clearly, if n is a prime, this test will go through, right? We'll say likely prime. But the moment you say no, if the algorithm said no, not a prime, this algorithm is correct, right? Algorithm is certain it's not prime. Why? Because if it's a prime, they have to be equal. So the moment you see not equal, it has to be not prime. And you can see in this case, it did not factor a number. It stated this number is not prime without a factor. It only has evidence. It's a proof this is not prime. Because if they find a number, like witness, so that's why composite in this language is trivially in NP, right? Because this is a NP evidence that this number is not prime. Because this X is evidence that this number is not prime. Because if this number is prime, this has to be equal to the right-hand side. Right? Because when it's prime, if you look at Jacobi symbol defined, it only has one factor left. It's just equal to that. Legendre symbol, it has to be equal to this. Right. So I can never, this algorithm, I can never say it's so lucky someone get it. It's really a deep understanding. Okay. So what they proved? Then you said, what did they prove to get all the prize, right? So they actually prove one statement. So the entire paper, quite short, right? Solovay-Strassen, they prove the following. So clearly, the main thing is that when you're facing a not prime, what is the probability you pass? You say likely prime, right? Because that's the only time you can make a mistake, right? So the Solovay-Strassen theorem can be stated in this very simple box. Let me put it here. So that's not my board layout. So Solovay-Strassen, okay, this is a theorem. Solovay-Strassen. If n is not a prime, right, then this thing, x, such that x to the n minus 1 divided by 2 mod n is equal to Jacobi symbol is a group. So you can see this is whole group theory. Show that. Let me use better is a subgroup. So this is the main theorem of Solovay-Strassen. They said, actually they said the following, the two parts, but particularly is more aligned with this, otherwise it's everything, okay? So when n is not a prime, then this is a proper subgroup. Let me use a better language. Is a proper. So what is a proper subgroup means not everything, right? When n is not a prime, the set of x that pass through the test form a proper subgroup. Because if x passes the test, you can, and y passes the test, you can easily check x, y also pass the test. Because that actually multiplicative is true. Okay, so that's given the subgroup. And you can also look at the inverse of the thing. So they just check this thing, and they in each case they find an element that is not in it. So it's a proper sum, right? So it's just based on this theorem by Lagrange theorem. Every subgroup cannot be too big. A subgroup cannot be bigger than half of the original group. Agree, right? Because the cardinality of subgroup divides the cardinality of original group. The best way to divide is by 2, sometimes by bigger number, right? So which means that the subgroup cannot be fundamentally bigger than half of the original group. So then, because of this, Solovay and Strassen prove that their procedure failed to test for composites is with probability half. Half a chance it will be incorrect. So how do you make it more confident? You try several times, right? Right. So this again come back. That's why at the beginning I talked about this fishing, right, or the coins, right? They said